Board. You didn't hear it, but just told me recording in progress, which is very reassuring.
We heard.
So, oh, you guys heard. Okay, excellent. So, who here, who was here, remembers what we talked about in the last year? Only use one person.
Sex and violence.
I remember
You know,
the sex part.
The violent part, I don't know. Violence, maybe retribution, but so what was it a metaphor for? The sex.
Two women who were part of the Jewish faith who went off the derech and big time.
That's the mushal, right? And we know that the nimshal is talking about Yehuda and Yisrael, or Shomron as they call it.
Yeah.
And but adultery is a metaphor for idol worship and allying with other nations and not being faithful to God. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. What is punishment for adultery?
Skila,
Say it again.
skila.
Oh, Bruce brings up a very good and a very accurate point. Let me just say that I looked up, I decided to have a little bit of fun with this. So I looked up adultery and punishments through the ages, and I'll tell you what I came back with. And this is, I recently realigned my phone where I keep my notes. I've got a section on commentators and a section on Jewish history. But what we are talking about is 3rd century Mesopotamia. 3rd century Mesopotamia, 3rd century BCE. Punishment for adultery in 3rd century Mesopotamia was drowning. Okay, good.
By the way,
Code?
we're talking about Adis and a straw, or just
Excellent question, and we will deal with it. The Hammurabi Code, 2285 to 2242 BCE. Penalty for adultery is death by drowning for both parties. A husband, however, can pardon his wife, and if he does so, the king may pardon her lover. Getting more progressive as we go along. Okay, it's Hammurabi Code. Let's take a look at adultery in Torah law. The biblical punishment for women who committed adultery intentionally in the presence of Adim and Hasra was Misa, as of Vayikra Chaf Yud. And the basis for punishment of stoning, skila, specifically for adultery, is clearly provided. The pasuk reads, Sukkim Yud through Yud Bet. The man commits adultery with another man's wife. Now, once again, what we're doing is we're defining adultery as a person who commits a sexual crime, sexual congress with another man's wife, even the wife of his neighbor. Both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. It's our law. So, okay, it's Torah law. Now, there was a Ashkenazi, quote, Perushim community in Yerushalayim in the 19th century, and it was called Kanu, I believe it was, K-A-N-U, and based on historical testimony provided by Yoshua Yellen, who lived 1843, 1924, and he was a major figure in the Perushim congregation, and one of those in the 19th century initiated the practice of banishing those found guilty of adultery or homosexual relations to residences outside the walls of Jerusalem. So the punishment gets interesting, it gets specific. So I'm going to ask our resident attorney, what is the punishment for adultery in American law? And then I'll ask you why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a jail term.
So, adultery although it's a misdemeanor in most of the states with laws against it. Some, including Michigan and Wisconsin, categorize the offense as a felony. Punishments vary widely by state. In Maryland, the punishment for adultery is $10. In Massachusetts, an adulterer could face up to 3 years in jail.
Wait a second, who pays the $10?
Um,
It depends what she
person-
looks like, I guess.
I don't know if it's she. I don't know if it's the person who committed the adultery. I don't know if we're talking about if
Can they make change of a 50?
No, but we'll give you 5 plays for a 50. I don't know if that's the case of a married man having adultery with a woman, and if he pays the $10 to his wife, the $10 paid to the state of Michigan. I don't know, but I found this very interesting. And why? Why am I asking these questions? Because generally speaking, our lessons and the lessons taught by Ezekiel have to do with action, warning, divine reaction. And so we talked about in very graphic terms, very disturbing terms. We compared the behavior of Klal Yisrael, specifically in the Yehuda region, to 2 women. Well, we talked about Oholiba and Aholah. Anybody remember who Oholiba was? What that represented? Oholi means my tent, so that is a clear hint. We're talking about my tent, and God is one giving these kinuyim or nicknames. So Oholi Ba means my tent is there. That would be Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh and the Beis Hamikdash. So that would be Yehuda. Aholah represents the fact that we talked last week about how Yerovam ben Nevat Chotei Machti, the Klal Yisrael, he created Aholah, is her own tent. Because
May I
remember,
ask a question? I apologize. It's outside the scope of this, but if you don't mind if I just ask a question. If Reuven commits adultery with Sarah, Sarah is a married woman, Reuven sleeps and commits adultery. Subsequent to that, he marries Leah, who's a single woman, whatever. They have children. Is that a proper kosher relationship?
okay, firstly, if he commits adultery with the same woman he wants to be
No,
later
a different
married,
woman. A different woman.
he commits adultery. Okay,
He can
first,
only commit adultery with somebody else's wife.
He
That's
commits
true.
adultery with Sarah. Then he finished with that relationship, and he meets Leah. Leah is a single girl, never married, whatever. They get married to have children. Is that a proper normal marriage with proper normal children? I'm just
Yes.
curious.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
yes, if the first marriage ends in divorce, he's not, I wouldn't give him shlishi and shul, maybe Ravi, I don't know. Ravi was always the Aliyah reserved for Amaratzim. That's the Aliyah I always get whenever I leave my shul. So I don't know if I give him shlishi, but he's not the best guy in the world, but you committed adultery, and it depends, Adam and Hasra'ah, so you're committing with another woman, so that woman has to be married, that this married man is committing this act with. So those two are subject to punishments based upon what? That married woman fell under the parsha of a sota, and who was warned by her husband against kina and stira. Kina, he had ruach kina. There was a jealous spirit that overcame him, maybe with good reason. And stira, and he said, I don't want you to seclude yourself with Reuven. I don't want you to do it. And she does. And there are Adam and Hasra, and enough time in the circumstances, then both of them are subject to death. And depending if she's a Bas Kohenes or not, the death for Bas Kohen is Sreifa, and the death for a Bas Yisrael and for the Ben Yisrael is Spila. But
So
let's go
long
to
as
that.
we're at it, what does Adam mean?
Adam means People,
I mean, I know it. No, what is ethos? What do you need to have?
ages,
Of
two
what?
people who are in people who say we saw the act. We saw the two of them seclude themselves, and we say they were secluded for enough time for them to have committed the act. That's what ADIS is. And they are independently examined with regard to all kinds of circumstantial evidence to see if what time of day was it, what color tie was he wearing, how many buttons, a lot of stuff.
Don't they have to see the act?
That's the answer.
No,
No,
no. By the way, Neil, we were talking about adultery. And I'll tell you about all the great laws that I studied and told about adultery in history and modern history and what the penalties are for it. And but first, Marvin's question is, can a person who committed adultery, then he goes and he marries a nice Jewish single girl, can he do it? The answer is yes. Can he marry a single girl? But the question is, what was the nature of the adultery? The adultery was with a married woman. Was a married woman, was a proper Adam and Hasra? Could it be there was one aid? And you're asking me, did they have to see the act? The answer is no. They have to testify that enough time took place for this act, this alleged act, to have been committed. That's the story. That's really what it is. And again, it gets further complicated when you bring in the laws of Sota. Sota is a woman whose husband says, I'm telling you now, I don't want you getting together with this man. And then we say the woman did get together with this man, and we don't know. So
Yeah, but how can you put someone to death if they said we played Scrabble?
because she's tested. She's tested the bitter waters. This is biblical stuff. I mean, don't come here and write the Bible. Or Leonard Cohen said, I'm the little Jew who wrote the
No,
Bible.
that's only if a man is, what if it's not someone
that's
saying about his wife? Just a plain old thing.
What's the question?
How do you use circumstantial evidence like that? Or just
Okay,
the suspicion.
I can only speak to the extent of my knowledge and my memory, what I've learned in Gemara and Halakha. If a man and a woman are observed to have been secluded together for whatever the unit of time, it could be 7 minutes, I believe, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, I don't know how many minutes,
the question.
to have
Quickie.
cohabited together, and two witnesses say it, then they are deemed to have committed adultery. But,
Were they warned?
and Naomi asked if they were warned. Correct, I'm wrong. Aiden v'hasra, they have to have been warned. Just that they just observed, they have to have been warned. Ain't onshin ella im kain mazhirin. There's no punishment unless there was warning. Now, Richard and I both know, and whoever else has been learning Daf Yomi, that we talked about midaber in recent Gemara in Subos about a woman who said this, a woman who said that, the pregnant woman, the Bosco, don't ask. It happens to be the topic du jour for the past couple of days in Subos. But why did I bring up the subject? Because last week, the metaphor was adultery for ahala and ahaliba, for Shomron and for Yehuda. So like we said, the pattern in the Navi is, here's a list of everything you did wrong, here's the punishment. So I said, so what's the punishment for adultery? So I started out, what's the punishment for adultery in 3rd century in Mesopotamia? And the punishment was drowning. We went on to the Hammurabi Code. We went on to what the Torah says. Then we went on to the Kona community, Kanu community outside of Yerushalayim in the 19th century, which excluded them, put them outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. They went to American law, where it ranges from $10 in Michigan to a felony charge in Massachusetts. So what's the punishment over here? You want the punishment over here? This is what got me real good. And I'm going to tell you what it is, and then we're going to talk some more about it. If you look at Pasuk, find the right Pasuk. Is it Pasuk Lamed? Got to find the right Pasuk. I will find it in 1 second. Okay. One second, guys. I'm sorry for fumfering around over here. Yes, Pasuk Chaf Hey. Chaf Hey. The Pasuk reads, listen carefully. Benasati, God talking, Kinasi, my jealousy, and this very much is in parallel to what we talked about, the adulterous wife, the Isha Sota, my jealousy bachim you, biasu osach, and they shall act towards you, bechema apech, with burning fury, biosnayich yosiru, they will cut off your ears. He says, and afterwards, he said, you will fall on the sword. Not voluntarily. They'll get you from behind. Says your children, your sons, and your daughters will be taken. Those left behind will be eaten, will be consumed by fire. We're talking about a punishment that God is sanctioning, and I'll tell you why I say God is sanctioning, to have their noses cut off and their ears. He says, apech, the nose, the osnayach. That's why he asked what the punishment was. That's why I wanted to know in 3rd century Mesopotamia, was there anything like this whatsoever in terms of the punishment? And the answer is no. But what you have to look at is Pasuk. I'm skipping around because I read the things and I have to find out where the exact Lashon is. No. The Pasuk says, we'll find it, but the Pasuk says that the nations of the world will have free reign to do what it was that they chose to punish us with. They are sanctioned to do it. This is not Torah punishment by any means, shape, or form. This is what the nations of the world decided to do. So, how does this relate to life and everything else? First thing I want to read you is a little introduction to Abarbanel. This is the Abarbanel on Pasuk Chaf Bet. The Abarbanel says, so he says, on Pasuk Chaf Bet, it says, L'chein ahalibah ko amar Hashem. Until it says, Vayomer Elai ben Adam tishpot es ahalah. So that's a number that's from the beginning and ending of the pasuk, and it says, Hasiba lama, the reason why, it says Yova'u lehilachemba. Now remember, we've been talking about paramours. We've been talking about consensual relations with other nations of the world. We've been talking about flirting. We've been talking about consummating. He says, but so why are they coming after us? He says, Acharei shem hayu ma'ahavdecha. They were your lovers. Why are they attacking you? Yamar, shahaya zeh lefi shebihi yosam ma'ahavdecha nak'ah b'sara nashra mehem. She went away from them. And what is this? This is an allusion to Tzidkiyahu. Shemarad b'melech Bavel. Bavel was an ally. Hashem told Tzidkiyahu, said, you have to keep your alliance with the Melech Bavel. Let him come in. You won't be killed. He didn't do it. He says, the Oso Marad, Ye'orereim lavo l'achriv es Yerushalayim. They got all incensed and excited, and they decided to sack and burn Jerusalem, which is, by the way, what we begin to talk about in the next parak. Now, on Pasuk Chaf Gimel, and we will not be reading a lot of psukim. Chaf Gimel says, B'nei Bavel v'kol hakastim. Look at the words. Pasuk Chaf Gimel in your Mikros Gedolos, it's page 376. Kol hakastim, those are Chaldeans. The Kod, the Shoah, the Koah. Strange names. What are they? And we'll tell you. The Kol B'nei Ashur, the Syrians, Osam, Bachure Chemed. We already had that term before. He says, charming young men. Pachos, Uskanim. These are high-ranking officials. Kulam Sholi Shim, Ukiru In, Rochesu Sim Kulam. They were on horseback. They were in chariots, pardon me. They were, thank you, honey. They were prominent people. And those are the ones who are turning against you. So on that, Rabbi Eisenman is a little bit of an overview in Pasuk Chav Gimel. The Kod, the Shoah, Koah. He says the Babylonian army will be made up not only of Kasdim, Chaldeans, but also the armies of satellite nations. This is according to Targum, and many commentators are right. The Kod, Shoah, the Koah are the names of places. Radak comments that the three words describe various kinds of officers. The code means to appoint. The kid, someone who's appointed to do a job. Shoah means a mighty person. Koah does not recur in scripture. David should be interested in that. This is the one time it appears in all scripture. It can be interpreted only from context. It says Bachure Chemed. This echoes the characteristics which had first attracted Israel to Assyria. They were nice looking men. Remember last week we talked about drawings of the beautifully armed men in the walls of Jerusalem. And Dr. Breuer, the intention is to be sarcastic. Does Israel still think of the Assyrians as peasant? The description, Krovim, neighboring, he said, which we have in Pasuk Hey, earlier in this parak, is missing. The time had long passed that Israel could have a feeling of affinity for the Assyrians. Kruim, appointees, those were called summoned. A similar expression in Bamidbar, Tes Zayin Bet, means those are called by the congregation to counsel, the important people in the community. In this sense, Radak interprets the word in our verse. Breuer translates ones who were invited by God, Kruim, for the purpose of destruction. Zephaniah has something similar. So who's coming to the party? Basically, that's what we're talking about. So crime is adultery. And we discussed punishments for adultery. And now discussing the punishment that is mentioned over here. Now, for some reason I said an art scroll page, Pasuk Lamed Dalet. Then we'll go back. Lamed Dalet, that's page 190, 191, Naomi. You'll see, it is, no, you 191.
192.
192, 193. No, I'm looking at where I have outlined pages. Sukkim over here.
Lama Dalet is 192.3.
You only have highlighted.
Pasuk, I'm sorry. Pasuk Chaf Dalet. He says, Uba'u alayach, would anybody care to read Pasuk Chaf Dalet in Hebrew and English? Anybody? David,
Chotzein, Rechev, Gal, Bikal Amim, Sina, Again, Karva, Yosimu, Alayach, Saviv, Nasati with Nechem, Mishpat, Mishpatu, Mishpatehem.
Shvatuch the Mishpatehem. That was the pasuk I was looking for. First, before you translate it. No, actually, you don't have to. If you look at the Art Scroll Parish on this, on page 191, from the first, second, third entry. Naomi, would you read it loudly, please?
The one that's highlighted?
Yes,
V'natati lifneim mishpat.
louder,
Yes?
louder, please. Yeah.
V'natati lifneim mishpat. I will place justice at their disposal.
Listen,
I will-
justice at their disposal.
I will appoint them as my agents to administer justice, according to Rashi, so that in effect I will join them in the destruction. That's Radak. Mishpatuch v'mishpatehem, and they will punish you with their judgments according to their own laws that are more cruel than mine.
Mine meaning Hashem.
Such as blinding their captives. That's Rashi.
Who was blinded? Anybody remember?
Shimshon.
Tzidkiyahu was blinded. And he was blinded after he saw his sons get killed. Killed his sons and blinded him. Continue, please.
You adored their customs and laws. So it's only fitting that you be punished according to those same laws.
Radak. Okay. Richard, read the translation of that pasuk, please.
They will come against you with weaponry, with chariot and wheel, and with an assemblage of nations, with buckler, shield, and helmet. They will set upon you all around. I will place justice at their disposal, and they will punish you with their judgments.
Once again, punish you with their judgments. So,
Which
like we said,
probably is more stringent than Hashem's.
they're definitely more stringent than Hashem's, which is, you know why? There are two sides to that story. God says, punish them. So they get a little bit overzealous, how they decide to punish us. So God has ample reason and cause to punish them back, as we've seen throughout the Nevi'im. So again, I call attention to Pasuk Chav Hey. When Asati kinasi boch, Yasuo soch bechema, act against you with bechema. I broke the pasuk in the wrong way, with anger, burning fury. Apech v'yoznayach yasiru. Remove your nose and your ears. So we have no precedent for this kind of a punishment at all in any of the historical laws and codes of laws that I brought to you. So I'd like to read you something Rav Steinsaltz says about it. He says, I'm going to read it in Hebrew and translate. Apech yosnaich yasiru. Zlufi din haTorah mutal al hanoef hanoefes din maves. The Torah says the adulterers are sentenced to death. Lelo kol hashpalah, without any lowering them. What does it mean by hashpalah? Demeaning. It says, O pigia gufanis acheres. There's not, you're killing somebody, that's the punishment. You don't have to mutilate them. That's the Torah law doesn't say that. It says, uluyumazos. And with regard to this, the punishment that Yechezkel is describing, kolel hashpala, degrading, pegia gufanis, he says physical mutilation, she bisofa Mavis, that ends in death. So there's a bunch of stuff going on in between. Mishpatei Nifur Mishalhei Ha'elav Ashlishi. The 3rd century BCE is what that means. In Mesopotamia, Me'idim al Hashpalas no Ephes the Pumbi. They talk about public denigration, public degrading of the woman who commits adultery. Al Yedei Giluach Sarah. They cut off her hair.
No, expose.
Giluach. Legaleach means a haircut. Cutting off her hair. It says, V'hafshat tasa ukrisa apa. He says, taking off the nose, he says, Hafshat tasa gam b'kovtzei chukim ashuriyim me hamea ha-15, from the 15th century, he says, before. So he's talking about 1,500 years before the Common Era. Nizkar, ki haboel rashai lechros es apa shel ishto hano ephes. 15th century BCE, he says, it's not boel, but the Baal. The husband has the right to cut off the nose of his wife who commits adultery. There's some precedent for this. Ulam, shelo kibedivrei Yechezkel, not this way. Sham zehu onesh kulo. Here, this is the entire punishment. Nira efo she Yechezkel bikesh l'ta'er, says churban kosher. He says there is no precedent, he says, below the Shakef Dine Onshim the Kubalim. Yechezkel is saying this type of punishment is extraordinary. Doesn't exist someplace else. So says Rav Steinfels. Further, let's look at the Ramad Vali. What does he say about this? Ramad Vali gives you a little bit of paralleling, because remember, this is really about Mida Keneged Mida. So how is this Mida Keneged Mida? How does the punishment fit the crime? Ramad Vali says, Midas Hadin, he says, She Tikshe es libam shel oivim, we're going to harden the hearts of the enemies. Lehisnaheg imahem bidin hakosher b'li mituk. That means there will be no mitigation of the punishment. V'zesha kasuv v'nasati kinasi bach v'yasu osach b'chema apech v'yaznach yasiru, which is what we read in the pasuk. It says derech zilzul bizayon. This is degrading in every sense of the word. Kedei lahashchis is partufam, to destroy their face. Richard, you'll like this piece. It says, Shahare ein me'idin ela bepartzuf panim im hachotein. Sound familiar? The only way we can proof positive identify a corpse is if the face has a nose on it. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, it was the beginning of Subos, it was the end of Yevamos.
In Yevamos.
The end of Yevamos, say, how do you know somebody's proof positive? Because we're trying to find out if the woman is qualified to be miyubam, to have a levirate marriage. The answer is, well, I saw the husband on the battlefield. That if the husband's face doesn't have a nose attachment, we can't prove positive identify. So listen to this. We're talking about taking away the identity of the adulterer. He says, Kol gazar bilamala onish kilkulam. You messed up. This is your punishment. Ki hasaras achotem, removing the nose, lefi shebo charon af. Remember, we said chema. Chema means burning fury, usually associated with the nose. Shahayu koasim, v'shalfim damim kolayom. We talked about one of the great sins was murder, constant murder. He called it a city of blood, a city of murderers. And he said, the anger associated with the nose.
But that's not what the Navi says. I hate to interject.
Okay, well, when I'm done, I'm going to tell you why we're reading Ramad Bali, Rav Moshe David Bali, and then you
Yeah.
can interject and take it up with him. Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
He says, also, by the way, in the end of this parish, you'll see another reason for it. But let's do it. Hasaras Haznayim. Why do you remove the ears? Shelo rotzu lishmoa ol devar Hashem. V'gam perishu derech remez. Hakahuna v'hamalchus. The priesthood and the kingship says apayach. That's kahuna. Why? Hashem yasimu ketorah biapech. They'll put ketores on the fragrant incense. Yosnayach hamalchus. Why? She'azneha kashuvos tamid. The ears are always attuned. L'shmo es hakol k'dei lasos mishpat. They need to hear everything in order to judge properly. Did they judge properly? Not so much. The erach roza istaklus ha'af ha'ozen ha'elyonim. He says the nose and the ears are on top, as it says, below ariach b'riach nechochem, and I will not smell your pleasant aromas of your korbanos. Ki reach hakarbon asui la'alos al chot mo shel Hashem Yisbarach kavyachol. It's a sensory thing that has to do with the nose. Ulahachzir es hadayanim lenar takein tiyadua. I can't translate all words. Let me see. And he finishes by saying, the achrisech, the cheref tipol, he says, and the end of you, you will fall or you'll be killed by swords. El hadinim hamiskabrim, says the Edan Rischa, he says in the burning fury, bedarga tata, in the lower world, Raza, the achris hayamim. This alludes to the time to come. Shinofelas imadre gasa, the pesha habonim, says that it comes down to the coming down, descending, lowering from their higher level in the sins of their sons. Achitzonim lochim klolus ahashpa'ah. He says shehem sod banim ubanos. It gets bigger than me to be able to translate it. But David says who? Well, I don't know if you could argue with the fact that the nose corresponds to the smell, reich nichoach, corresponds to the smell of the ketores.
I am going to argue with all of that.
Good.
Yeah, because I went to summer camp and we had color war. And every time we had color war, we'd make a big sign and we'd say the blue in the background corresponds to this. The green corresponds to this. You can make anything fit anything. I guarantee you if it talked about cutting off other parts of the body, he could have brought in other things as well. The bottom line is, it says what you read in Kafdal, Shvatuch b'mishpatehem. They're doing their judgments, and their judgments were cut off the nose and the ears. Boom. Don't look for more stuff.
Well, so why do we read Rav Moshe David Bali, who lived?
I don't.
Because you didn't buy the book.
Okay. No, you're reading. Look, the point is you can read anything. You can read anything into it if you want. You know, you can start. The question is it really there, or are you forcing something onto it?
You can't read anything into it. I can't read anything into it. We're not at the level. We are
Okay.
not Rishonim, we are not Achronim. And if we want to argue about what they said, more power to it.
I
was
see,
he?
I see what's written here. That's all I see.
So I guess you're Tzeduki.
100%.
There you go. Everybody, David Tzeduki, there you go. He's a
Come out.
Sabbath. Mahabdil Elef Abdullah. From
Execute.
Moshe David Valley. Why
Communicate.
am I reading him? He is a foremost student of the Ramchal in Padua, Italy. It says, one page, but he was also a doctor as well as a rabbi. He was a Kabbalistic scholar of repute and lectured before the Paduan Association known as the Vakshe Ado Noi, in company with the two noted scholars, Yisrael Hezekiah, Treves, and Jacob Chazak. These lectures were attended by Ramchal, who, becoming deeply interested in Kabbalah, began to study it under Vali. Now we say Talmud Chavar. He says, and I'm trying to see if it says it over here. It says, Mi Beit Medrasho, Rabbi Moshe David Vali, Mi Beit Medrasho Shel HaRamchal, who was from the base Medrash of the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It's quite a famous name in the world of philosophy. But he was a Talmud Chavar. He learned from him, and some it says that Ramchal learned from Rav Moshe David Vali, and Ramchal's acute intellect exceeded that of his contemporaries. At the age of 25, Vali wrote a polemical work in Italian against Christianity, divided it into 7 parts and entitled it I Sette Giorno della Verità, something about truth. He wrote also in Hebrew 70 tikkunim on Dvarim. Between 1721 and 1767, he wrote 8 large volumes in Hebrew, the greater part of them consisting of a commentary on the entire Bible. They're still unpublished. Ephraim Luzzatto wrote a sonnet entitled Ele Bene HaNeur, praising the lectures of Vali and Treves. He was respected. He was respected by the likes of the Ramchal, and his province was Kabbalah and defending the faith. So I go to Kabbalah when I find something that fits it. A Kabbalist deals with, he looks for pshat. We know the full of pshat, remez, drash, and so. I've seen the words in the past as we've learned together, says sodo shel davar. This is so, the highest level of secrecy. I've seen this alludes to what we're talking about now, or in the opinion of the holy of Moshe David Vali, these are illusions. So I ask you, if the deaths meted out in Mesopotamia were drowning, and they decided that they would cut off noses and ears, they could have cut off toes and legs and arms, they could have eaten their hearts, but they did, they chose this. There's a connection. David, I can't tell you how the connection, for Moshe David Vali, smarter than me, maybe not smarter than you, it was definitely smarter than me, found this connection, and I respect the connection.
I want to add, there is no place in the parak that talks about Kohanim. There is no place in the parak that talks about korbanot. The parak is talking about prostitution, and the prostitution is basically a metaphor for the Bnei Israel aligning themselves with the wrong nations, even though God told them who to do it, and they dishonored their contracts and so on. It's not talking about the smell of korbanot and the kohanim. It's a foreign reading into this psukim. I mean, yeah, you can add on anything you want. But you've got a very easy pshat that these are in Egypt and in other countries, this is how they punished people. And it says, Shvatuk b'mishpateim. I don't know why you have to go further.
Anybody recognize a little bit of Shelley Schechter over here? Yeah, some of the guys do. David is no Shali Shativ. That's okay. One of our dear friends who learned in this Chabur for a while, he left because he knew that you were coming and he wouldn't be needed anymore. So what I'd like to do, David, your exception is noted and respected. So we dealt with the Onesh of Ahal Liba, which goes Chaf Gimel to Lamed Aleph. So the Onesh that was perpetrated on them is this very harsh and very, very strange sounding punishment. Now,
Defacing,
say it again.
defacing.
Defacing, good. So what follows when we talk about this Onesh, we talk about it for about 9 psukim. Then we get to Pasuk Lamed Beis. And he says, actually, we look at Lamed Aleph first. What does Lamed Aleph say? Lamed Aleph, if you look at Pasuk Lamed Aleph, B'derech achosech, we're talking to Oholiba, talking to Yehuda. B'derech achosech halach. You did what your sister did. When asati kosa biyodech. What are we talking about? We're talking about something that Yeshaya and Yirmiyah talked about ad infinitum. They talked about, we watched the sins and the abominations and the punishment and the banishment of Yisrael, Shomron, for 300 years. 3 centuries. Did we learn anything from it? We learned how to do it, maybe outdo it. That's what we learned. And he says, you went in your sister's derech. So I will put her kos in your hands. Well, what's that going to be the kos of? The kos of, oh, by the way, David, just wanted you to know that Rashi, Radak, Metzudas, and Abarbanel talk about this as a metaphor for Israel's high priesthood and monarchy. So you may not see it, but Rashi, Radak, Metzudas, and Abarbanel did see it. So that's not me. So the reason why Pasuk Lamed Beis, which reads, Ko amar Hashem Elokim, kos hachosech tishti ha'amuka. What does amuka mean? It means deep. He says, Lahar chava. Why? Dielitzchok, you'll be a joke. Ulalag, a source of derision. Mirba lahachil. Mirba lahachil. How do we translate those 2 words, Lamed Bet, Naomi, the last 2 words? Lamed Bet, Mirba lahachil.
Of ample volume.
Says you'll be a big source of jest and derision. Okay. And he says, Shikaron, drunkenness, Chav Gimel, Yagon, grief, Kimo Le'i, you shall be filled with, Kos, Shama, Ushmama, Kos Achosech, Shomron. There is no equivocation about who we're talking about. This is the 10 tribes. This is the coast that they drank from, and we'll talk about that coast. And he says, V'shasisosa, you'll drink it. Pasuk Lamed Dalet, Umatzis, and you will squeeze out as Charasheha, the last drop. Tigoremi v'shadayich tinateki, you will cut off your own breasts. What are we talking about over here? So we're talking about, says Rabbi Breuer, Psukim Lamed Aleph through Lamed Gimel. Together with her sister, she has drained the cup of drunken passion. Therefore, she must now also accept from her hand the cup of bitter fate. This cup is sufficiently deep, wide, and big mirbah, meaning of large size, to hold all the ridicule and scorn of which she now has become the object. She'll have to drain also this cup until she becomes drunk. She can't below miyayin, drunk but not from wine. That's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, you might remember from about 10 years ago. Perak Chaf Aleph, pasuk, Perak Nun Aleph, pasuk Chaf Aleph, a sad commentary to our text. Shikaron Yagon Timol E. Like her sister, she too will have to suffer desolation, utter numbness, for she will once again receive new life. Pasuk 34 says, Shasisoso, to drink it, Matzis, drain it completely. Yes, Chorosheha says, Tigarmi, V'Shodai Tinakti. He says, you will smash it, this cup, after you drink it, to shards. You smash it to shards and tear off your own breasts. This is what God says. Now look as he says, Hashem Elokim, who reveals his loving kindness. What does Rabbi Breuer have to say about this? He says, she will have to drain this cup to the last drop. Matzah means to suck out. This image of utter depravity in which she drains her cup and then smashes it, cutting her own flesh with the shards, would arouse only disgust if this were an ordinary drunken woman. But in the case of Yehuda, this is an image of heroic self-purification. You've got a salt shaker, I'd use a little. Once she has drained the cup of suffering that she has brought upon herself by our conduct, it will break into pieces. She will then grind the shards into dust, and she will tear from her body the breasts into which Egypt had planted the seeds of corruption. He's telling us this is part of the refining process. He sees this all as a positive in the end. This imagery depicts Yehuda's firm resolve to erase the last traces of her past depravity. He's saying, you are doing this to yourself. You're accepting the punishment, and you are punishing yourself to rid yourself of anything reminiscent of Mitzrayim and those sins. The shards will then never have to come together again to form a new cup of suffering. Even as the earthen vessel, once it has been broken into pieces, cannot be put together again, so Israel too will never have to suffer again, says Yalkut Shimoni. You will not have to drink again from the great cup of my fury, which is what Yeshaya says in the next pasuk. After that, he says, you will drink the cup, but not of wine, but you will never have to drink from the great cup of my fury. There is Mashu. And what he's saying is this being a positive image. He said, God in his quality of Hashem uttered these words at the very moment when the nations prepare to strip the depraved woman of her clothes before dragging her to the execution site. Now it seemed to us incredible will come to pass. Why? Nu'um Hashem, God's promise. It is God himself who has promised it. Garam, literally, to separate the bones from the joints to which they are attached. Here, it implies the smashing of the parts that join together to form one vessel. And finally, he says, La'achein, he says, Kol Mar Shem Elokim, Pasuk Lamed Hey, Ya'an Shachachtosi. This is the key line. This is the tagline. You forgot about me. Atishlichi Osi, he says, and you threw me away. Acharei Gavech, you forgot me, cast me behind your back. Gam At says, She'i Simosech Yestaznu Sayach. You must bear the consequences. He says, Taznu Sayach. He says, Zimosech v'Taznu Sayach. Best words I've seen in English. Your obscenity and your harlotries. So let's just see what we're doing. We talked about the sins. The sins have all been a metaphor for putting our faith in the wrong people, not putting our faith in the people that God told us to, committing idolatry, and according to some, as we learned last week, actually all this immoral stuff, which we learned in Egypt when we were young. We had those disgusting images of nubile young girls being set in this life. And God saying, I'm going to punish you for adultery. And we see this absolutely horrific punishment, which is a disfigurement, as Richard said, well, a defacing, so that the corpse is no longer identifiable. Think about that for a minute, and think about it in the light that Rabbi Breuer is trying to cast it. He's saying that you have got to be transformed. You've got to do stuff to yourself, but I've also got to do stuff to you, the stuff that I've empowered the nations to do, who will ultimately be punished for it. So you are no longer recognizable as yourself. In other words, you're no longer recognizable as Klal Yisrael. You are a mutilated corpse, not identifiable. It, to me, it fits together. Okay.
I just want to add, I still think it's out of context what you had before, not giving in. And you're saying they talk, Rashi and everyone says it has, that the Perek does talk about Beit HaMikdash and so on. That's this part now. That wasn't before. Starting from Lamed Vav is where they talk about the Toavot HaMikdash, not before. The other stuff I think was out of context. That's all.
I get what you're saying, but actually that does appear in place in Pasuk Chaf Hei. It does, Pasuk Chaf Hei.
Where you see Kafeh is anything to do with Beit HaMikdash? Doesn't.
Chaf Hei is the punishment.
All right, whatever. Kafeh, the punishment.
David, you can fight harder than
I'm
that.
done. I did it.
You are not done.
I said what I had to say. Sorry, I took too long.
I love David. Listen, guys. So here we are. We just did Pasuk through Pasuk Lamed Hey, but we've got 14 more Pasukim in this parak. So what did I do? I did something David would approve of, I hope. Guys, I'm picking on David because I know him for 65 years. So we can do this. It goes like this. If you take a look, David, dot Mikra, look at dot Kuf Tzadik Dalet. He says, this is the second part of this parak. To'avosehen HaMikdash, the abominations in the Mikdash, Haznus Maharachokim Ba'onshan, the we say obscenity, licentiousness, said those who are far away. In other words, we're talking about the actions that we did with far away nations. We called them to us. But please listen to what the Dot Mikra says. L'fi Lashono, into the language, Signo no, the style, the no, the content. If Charlotte wrote the Chelik Hazeh, we can see in this section, Shel HaNevuah, Sikum Tamsisi, a succinct summary. What? Perek Tes Zayin, Perek Chaf Gimel, in which Nimshal Am Yisrael al Chata'av Yanshol Nashim No Avos, which they're compared to adulterous women. He says, Remez liyisodot min haperek hahistoriosophy. What's historiosophy, David? Historiosophy. I'm reading it right. I just know what it means. You must know. Okay. He said, what?
Historicity.
Could be. He says, historiosophy hashlishi, Now he's talking about the third historical source. I just pieced it together. Perek Chaf. He says, Tofa'azu eina chadasha. So this phenomenon that we are describing is not new. Eitzel Yechezkel. Kvar ra'inu says chazarot rabot k'ta'im shleimim. Many repetitions, entire sections. Achozrim kemat milah b'milah b'nevuasav. Yechezkel repeats words, concepts, whole paragraphs, sections. Makavana says leprokim gimel yudches lamed gimel. So far we've mentioned Kesayin, Chof Gimel, Chof, Gimel Yudches Lamed Gimel. That's 6 parakim in which this subject matter has been brought up before. The Ode, he says we're going to discuss the meaning of the summary of this part of the perek and why it comes before the next perek, which is the beginning of the Churban. Why it happens. He continues to say, Anishpatim muzkarim b'tchila. He says, those who are judged are mentioned first. He says, the lashon nistarim, in cryptic, concealed language, psukim mem through mel aleph, upanei alehem. He says, gel nochachim. He's speaking to people who are not there as though they are present. V'shuv he maskirim b'gush lishi. Then they're mentioned in the third person. Ad l'kros sof hanavua v'shem hu chozer medaber aleim b'gush sheni. In the second person, we are changing tenses all the time. Ain't this palei al chalifus b'tzuras hapniya? Says don't get all hot and bothered by this change. He says zem matzui b'signon hadibur achai kediburo shel navi. This is the way live speech works. This is the way people talk. Would say people, Nevi'im talk. Aponeh el ela sheyeshnam po imanu omeid hayom. Those who are with us today. Yelasher einenu po imanu hayom. Those who are not with us today. He says, and there are many examples of this. Chelik zeh mischalek shlosh piskaot. 3 parts. 1. Atoevos migdash, Lamed Vav through Lamed Tet. Beis haznusam harachokim, licentiousness with the foreign distant powers. And 3, hamishpat v'ha'onish, law and judgment. So what I did to prove this point is I just basically looked at these psukim and I looked at some of the words which should be somewhat familiar to, and I just found it says, they were adulterous as blood on the hands. Timuas mikdashi. That's pasuk lamed ches. Shapso sai chilelu. We've heard this before. Continue, and we go to pasuk mem. La'anashim ba'im mimerchak. Those coming from a distance. Mem aleph ukitarti. The Shamni Samta Allah. This is when we talked about the story of the maiden who God found as an infant, abandoned and neglected, and he adorned her in beautiful raiments. And what did she use them for? Seduce other people. That's Katarti Vishamni Samti Allah. And Pasuk Ben Gimel Balmar La Bola Ni Ufim. And La baloni ufim ata yiznu taznu seha vahi. Talk about taznu seha or whoring. It says mentioned again ufim memdal ve'avola kebo el isha zona. And what happens? All these foreign, distant powers will come upon you via kavo. El Isha Zona, to an adulterous woman, to a prostitute. the Elaholibama, Elaholiba, both of them, he says, Ishos Hazama. And he's saying, Va'anashim Tzadikim, Hema. He says, these are judges. Yishpetu, this is Memhe. Oshem, Mishpat, Noafos, Mishpat, Shovchos Dom. They'll be judged for their adultery, for their bloodshed. Ki Noafos Hena, Dom Biadeim. Says, they're in their committing these lustful acts, they have caused death to their own children. He says, and it's on their hands. And with that, you are free, of course, to look at some of these psukim, look at them in greater detail. There's a lot there. There are historical references that are alluded to. But basically, this is a repetition of at least 6 prakim worth of content, not to mention the stuff that we previously mentioned in this parak. And this parak, when we do parak Chav Daled is beginning of the actual korban. Once again, we dealt with the actions, now we dealt with the punishments, midah keneged midah. And some of you approved, some of you disagreed, but I love each and every one of you. Everyone, have a wonderful evening, and thank you for being here.
Shalom.
Good night.
Good night.
Shkayach.
All right.
Thank you.